Hello everyone! Have you ever taken an exam that turned your world upside down because all of them seem to be the correct answer and you cannot choose which one is the answer? Or have you ever taken an exam that is so easy that you can just sing while answering? Well, we will learn how to make one. In this video, we will know how to craft multiple choice exam. Recall that in assessment, we learned that there were classroom assessments which include the formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is done before and during the lesson and is not recorded, while the summative assessment is done after the lesson and is usually used for grading purposes. Now, we will focus on the summative assessment. Summative assessment is an assessment administered at the end of an instructional unit in a course. These assessments are intended to evaluate student learning by comparing performance to a standard or benchmark. They are often high stakes, meaning they have a high point value. Summative assessment can be done through paper and pencil tests, and one of that is the multiple choice test. As future educators, we are responsible for making ways and techniques on how to assess that our students really learned something from the lessons we had. And in this video, we will provide how and what are the techniques we need to know in crafting an effective and comprehensive multiple choice exam. There are 5 types of multiple choice exam. Number 1, single correct answer. Number 2, best answer. Example for this type of question has lines that choose the best answer. Number 3, negative questions. Example for these are the type of questions that states which is not included in the group. We also have number 4, multiple response, and lastly, combined response. A multiple choice test question consists of 3 elements. Number 1, item stamp. This can be in a form of question, problem, or any incomplete statement at the beginning of each item. 2, the correct option. And number 3, the distractors. These were presented as alternatives to the correct answer in a multiple choice exam. Example: a question is presented. Which of the following null hypothesis can be made based on the proposition? A, B, C, or D? The question, which of the following null hypothesis can be made based on the proposition, is the item stamp, while option letter B is the correct option, and letters A, C, and D are the distractors. Before making our test questions, we must ask ourselves, what concept do I want to test? Where do the learners go wrong? In this concept, teachers focus to challenge the students. There are 5 styles of making a multiple choice exam. First, the question is looking for a correct response. Example: what is the shape of the sampling distribution of the means if random samples of size n become larger? A, left skewed, B, right skewed, C, normal, or D, rectangular. Second, the stem is stated as an incomplete sentence. Example: draw a valid conclusion from the given premises. If you will go to the fiesta, you will eat plenty fatty foods. If you eat plenty fatty foods, you'll be stroked. Heart was stroked. Therefore, A, fatty foods are served during fiesta. B, Heart went to the fiesta and eat plenty fatty foods. C, Heart was stroked because of the fiesta. Or D, Heart was stroked because she ate plenty fatty foods. Answer for that is letter B. Heart went to the fiesta and eat plenty fatty foods. Third, the directed question that looking either a correct or false statement. Example: which of the following statements is correct? A, The mean of the sampling distribution of the means is less than the population mean. B. The mean of the sampling distribution of the sample means is greater than the population mean. C. The means of the samples drawn from a population are always equal to the population mean. Or D. The means of the samples drawn from a population may be equal, greater than, or less than the population mean. Fourth, word problem questions. Example: the average precipitation for the first 7 months of the year is 19.32 inches with a standard deviation of 2.4 inches. Assume that the average precipitation is normally distributed. What is the average precipitation of 5 randomly selected years for the first 7 months? A. 19.32 inches, B. 22.4 inches, C. 20.52 inches, and D. 15.56 inches. Fifth is the identification of which of the following statements are correct and select the response that contains these elements. Example: here are the following reminders in crafting the multiple choice question. STEM should present a clear and complete problem. The question should not clue the student to the correct answer. The stem of the question should agree grammatically with each choice. Options should be similar in length and amount of detail. All options should seem plausible. Avoid negative words in the question stem. Options should state only one idea. And avoid all of the above and none of the above options. Now, there are different ways to make and create a STEM effectively. Take note that in creating multiple choice tests, we would like to test the student's ability. So we will make sure that our questions were created and intended to measure the higher order thinking skills of the learners. One tip for this is to anchor it to the revised Bloom's taxonomy. The revised Bloom's taxonomy is based upon the cognitive objectives model that was developed in the 1950s by Benjamin Bloom. According to Bloom, there are 6 levels of cognitive behavior that can explain thinking skills and abilities used in the classroom, and in real life for that matter. Creating. In this level, the learner is being measured through making her or him generate new concepts and ideas out from the knowledge she or he has. In Bloom's original taxonomy model, this was known as synthesis. It requires that the student use designing or organizational skills. Examples of verbs are generate, plan, produce. Evaluating. In this level, the students were expected to critique and summarize things they have learned from the lesson. The best example for this is making hypotheses after an experimentation and investigation. Examples of verbs are check and critique. Analyzing. In this process, learners will have to break down the data that was provided in order to fully grasp the content, as it is now in more manageable parts. This usually requires learners to use comparative and/or deconstruction skills. Examples of verbs are differentiate and organize. Applying. In this level, learners are expected to take action and use the knowledge they have learned. This involves implementation of prior knowledge and skills. Examples of verbs are execute and implement. Understanding. This requires that the learners explain the situation or process in order to show that they have understood the materials. This usually involves summarizing, paraphrasing, or detailed descriptions. Examples of verbs are interpret, exemplify, summarize, infer, compare, and explain. Remembering. The learner's ability to retain and recall information. This usually comes in the form of recognition, retrieving, or listing. Examples of verbs are associated with this: recall and recognize. According to the model, the first 2 categories are typically not ideal for multiple choice tests as they don't generally allow for predetermined answers. However, the last 4 cognitive abilities allow for more predictable, concrete answers. One of the primary benefits associated with creating tests based upon this model is that the tests will not be unnecessarily difficult for the learner and are more effective in assessing the learner's knowledge of the subject matter, not to mention that they are easier to correct and to modify. Here are the 5 tips. Number 1. Always use plausible incorrect answers in the questions. Means that you create a good distractor. In this phase, you can make the wrong answer convincing. You have to make them plausible so that you are able to test their ability to remember the information and apply it to the problem. This is the only true way to gauge if a learner fully understands the concept. Note that do not create tricky questions by omitting important information. Integrate charts into the exam. Include charts or graphs in your test, which will force the learner to use their analyzing skills. By having them interpret the data, they will be tested on whether or not they have really absorbed the information. Number 3. Transform the verb. If you want to include a divergent thinking question on your test, you can generally accomplish this by turning it into a noun. For example, if you are trying to test your learner's ability to describe a scientific process, have them choose the best description for it. This can be used to test both their creating and evaluating skills. Create examples or stories that test their understanding abilities. Write out detailed stories or examples that the learner must read before answering corresponding multiple-choice questions. This will not only test their understanding ability, but their analyzing skills as well. You can also make the learner tap into their remembering or applying abilities if you create a story or example that asks them to draw upon knowledge they've already acquired. Use multi-level thinking. These are the questions that include wording such as the most appropriate, the most important. Such questions serve to test the learner's judgment skills or understanding of an in-depth subject. For example, you could ask a learner a question about identifying a particular mental illness by first giving them a detailed explanation of a patient who exhibits a set of observed symptoms. Then ask them to apply a particular psychological theory to come up with a diagnosis. Aside from the Bloom's taxonomy model, another one is the Solow model. One model that may prove more useful is the structure of observed learning outcome or Solow taxonomy. It is a model that describes levels of increasing complexity in a learner's understanding of subjects. It aids both trainers and learners in understanding the learning process. The model consists of 5 levels in order of understanding. Pre-structural. The learner doesn't understand the lesson and uses a much too simple means of going about it. The learner is unsure about the lesson or subject. Unistructural. The learner's response only focuses on one relevant aspect. The learner has only a basic concept about the subject. Multistructural. The learner's response focuses on several relevant aspects, but they are treated independently. The learner has several concepts about the subject, but they are disconnected. Assessment of this level is primarily quantitative. Relational. The different aspects have become integrated into a coherent whole. The learner has mastered the complexity of the subject by being able to join all the parts together. This level is what is normally meant by an adequate understanding of a subject. Extended abstract. The previous integrated whole may be conceptualized at a higher level of abstraction and generalized to a new topic or area. The learner is now able to create new ideas based on her mastery of the subject.